And I'm happy to hand over in this context to Fabiana Morandi, who will chair the next discussion round and present the speakers. But first, I want to present you, Fabiana. Fabiana Morandi is a mathematician with a PhD in chemical science with many years of international experience on sustainability assessment. And she's author of several scientific papers, both on theoretical aspects and on real case studies on sustainability assessment for territorial systems, such as urban systems, for logistics, and for different kind of production processes. So Fabiana, happy to hand over to you for introducing our next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you for introducing me, and I'm happy to introduce my 4 panelists. And I remind them that you have 15 minutes each to present your talk. And I'm happy to introduce Søren Nielsen. He has more than 30 years of teaching experience in system analysis and modeling, physical chemistry, environmental system management, toxicology and pharmacokinetic models. And he held about 60 courses in several countries around the world. And is also author of many scientific papers and several books. So please, the floor is yours. And I remind the audience to put all the questions in the Q&A box. Thank you.
I'll see if I can manage to make a screen share.
Yes, perfect.
Yes, okay. Sorry for this. Well, I would just want to say that I'm actually honored to be attending this session because in 1984, I joined a group here in Copenhagen that actually tried to convince politicians in Denmark that we should join IASA. Unfortunately, we never succeeded, so it has been a fight for 30 years, as Fabiana referred. I was rephrasing this a little. I will talk about this openness, which is giving problems when you do management, and it places us really somewhere between the constructive side and destructive side of ecosystems and society, for that matter. And also what we might face now is actually that we are going to do a lot of reconstruction after this COVID situation. So all of it with openness actually came out of questions from our group that what is it when we do management, what is good and what is bad management, and how may these opennesses, I always will talk about 2 now, how will they, an improvement of our understanding contribute to improvement also of the management. We can talk about different types. This is more or less trivial, but humans tend to interfere a lot with society and nature, in particular agriculture, which has been my interest for the last 4 or 5 years now, since I spent 1.5 years on the island of Samsø, which is considered partly sustainable. So all in all, what do we need to consider when we are doing this? And quite trivially, it has been addressed by several of the other authors. We are facing this enormous complexity of the nature, and we have to, and we know that as ecologists that we need to get used to the variability and the adaptive properties of the ecosystems. So previously we have also talked about the complex adaptive systems. So we have some organizational issues which has also been addressed up to now, ontology and phenomenology aspects. What I would like to stress here is first of all that we have this hierarchical organization, which is important when we discuss the entropy issues and also information issues, which can come out quite different, as Felix also said, depending on the situation. So, but we tend to use them in a, I would say, pretty disorganized manner, and this is what we're going to be better at if we are going to talk to people. But all in all, we need a better understanding of the ecosystem. In fact, I'm talking, as I said, about 2 types of openness. When I first started to work with this, I saw them as quite opposite, as quite, I would say, almost contradictory to each other. But right now, I'm of the attitude that none of them can actually live without the other. Both of them have a destructive side and a constructive side to them. The thermodynamic openness is probably the most well-known. It's coming from the second law of thermodynamics that we will have a look at later on, just to summarize what my opinion is around this. But destruction is dictated by the second law. Everything, there's no free lunch, as somebody stated it, and everything will strive at an equilibrium to the most probable distribution of particles. On the other hand, it has also ecosystems and biological organisms has openness to matter, which actually make it possible for them to grow and organize. Ontic openness, which is quite new, I'll try to explain it in a few seconds, is a less known feature, and all biological systems are of that kind. Also societies are ontic open. The destructive side is that this really high number of combinatorial possibilities that the system can read will inevitably lead to a decay. But it is also constructive because that is where all new solutions to problems will emerge. Just to recapitulate some of the history, Boltzmann and Gibbs already did some consideration of the importance of thermodynamics to biology, but they had no ecosystems that appeared much later. Lotka also did some speculation on the free energy importance to organisms and minor populations, in particular of in decaying systems. Schrödinger made this unfortunate statement of living systems feeding on net entropy, which actually gives the picture that something like negative entropy can exist. And I think that caused a lot of, or is the crux of much of the confusion in the area. Prigozhin and co-workers started out with postulating that biological or far from equilibrium systems, I should say, would develop towards a minimum entropy production. James and Swenson went exactly the other way around and stated that every system would develop into a maximum entropy production. Jürgensen and K. M. Snyder made both a fourth law of this and formulated it in terms of exergy. In principle, what we talked about earlier is the question now about the storage or the dissipative processes of the system. And we will have many more. I've given a reference for a historical review that we just made, some of us in this context. As Bob Jolanovic also mentioned, this has a tendency to develop into a very, very unfortunate set of metaphors and leading to a directly mechanist understanding of what organisms and ecosystems are about in energetic context. And together with reductionism, which was, I agree, is pretty successful in some contexts, but it also has had the consequence, unfortunately, that we have refused almost to talk about the wholes, and that is the system capacities or properties, features, including something like emergent properties and the teleological development that is possibly going on in ecosystems. We have some really theoretical problems that we need to address. That is that something like entropy is simply not very well defined, far from equilibrium conditions. So we need to answer this simple question: what is entropy actually in this sense? And should it actually develop towards a minimum or maximum? We'll see. I try to summarize my opinion on this one. Maybe it should be rather a corollary than a conundrum, but at least taking into from a quantitative point of view, if you have accounting for CHNOPS, as Moravec stated, you have accounted for 99% of that is going on in the systems. We also have to consider that from cell and upwards in the biological hierarchy, everything or downwards actually, it's physically bounded, but we have constructed as humans the boundaries of the ecosystems upwards in the system. That gives some limitation to our understanding of the openness. So what I would state is that the thermodynamical openness, the continuous flow of the energy and matter, makes it possible for the respective focal systems to organize the elements and getting to develop steadily more advanced stages, what we know as evolution or development. The primary ecosystem input is actually coming from high quality entropy from the solar radiation. And in my context, nothing would happen on Earth if we didn't have this photoautotrophic components, which is the basic of everything in society. The major component bringing into our living conditions is agriculture. There's also the material gradients, which make complexity diversity higher. This is known now from mountain regions that is having a high, unexpectedly high diversity. So we talked about system closure, circular economy. They are highly efficient ecosystems by this bounding and keeping by recycling of material matter, detritus and proteus, keeping the materials inside the systems. So what they do is tend to accumulate as much as matter and energy as possible. That is maximizing energy storage. But larger structure, on the other hand, also have a higher dissipation. But if you refer to organism level, at least Sotin and Sotina would claim that it's leading to a higher efficiency. So eventually it's leading to a relatively lower dissipation density. I've just tried to illustrate it. You on the left-hand side see a development of an ecosystem through the time. And now you see on the right-hand side, you will see how I conceive it, that the system will develop around some lines. I'll come back to a similar picture later in this talk. And the system can stay in operating points and bifurcate and so on. And from all of these will be thermodynamically efficient state, and you will see an increasing efficiency of the systems. But what about the other openness? It's coming from the quantum physicists Walter Elsasser, who characterized biological systems as being heterogeneous. That was, I think, Jolanovic mentioned that. So, as opposed to the homogeneous system that he was used to work with. Heterogeneous system has the feature that they easily, when you calculate the combinatorial possibilities on them, they will lead to numerical explosions, leading to what Elsasser called immense numbers. They're really incredibly high. And I think Jolan has always mentioned this possible way of calculating. Elsasser sets a realistic limit. It's 10 to the 100, a number called Google, over which all numbers are considered immense. So if you consider something like a COVID virus, a simple virus, a simple cell. Well, let's take the COVID RNA string, has a length that is actually having a consequence that it has 10 to the 18,000 possibilities combinatorial. This is really enormous complexity of the situation. And this means that everything can happen, and this is what we're seeing at the moment. The disadvantages for many of this is, as referring to one of the first slides, is that we always have to base this on some ontological elements, and it's dependent on what level of hierarchy that we're doing it on. What we can deduce from a property like Ontic Openness is that something will happen in the system. We have the variability element of neo-Darwinism guaranteed. Remember that this is an assumption behind Darwinism, but it's really, the causality is never really addressed. It's just there. That something is actually unpredictable. It will have no direction. So there's no selectional mechanism. It's Ontic Openness. It will take any random way that it could be. It may be positive, negative. In Harry Rubin, one of the, I would say, followers of Elsasser's and implementers of Elsasser's principles in his science, he sees already from day zero that systems are disintegrating and disorganizing, and well, he equates that with disease or aging. In a positive way, we could actually see that we can improve the functionality, like in autocatalysis. So we go towards an increased efficiency, and this is what we see now in the COVID situation, that some of the coronaviruses are competing with each other, and the more efficient of the new varieties will actually start to be more successful and win the game. This is in particular important because the size of the genome for a coronavirus guarantees that you would have 2 to 3 mistakes equalized with mutations per replica. Remember, we have a lot of people infected and a lot of viruses going on, so there will be a lot of replications going on, a lot of mistakes, and in particular, coronavirus have no proofreading system, so it's just there. Revising our picture of this kind of system, every Ontic Open system will behave within a limited tube. The tube is not a regular tube, it's bulky all over, but the systems that we normally consider as common are behaving somehow within these limitations that are the constraints of the system. All are possible viable solutions, we will not be able to distinguish them. The other point is now that when we see such line evolving, they will leave out a lot of void space. And I fear actually this is what we will see right now, is that the void space will, for the coronavirus, start to be exploited. Normally, it's not accessible. It has been so heavily constrained that it will not be a possible solution for us. Trying to illustrate the directionality in it, at the point of every line of these tubes, you will see a possibility that you will have this positive change of a line in the system due to Ontic Openness variation, or you will see the regression winning of the system. I tried to explain that in a genetic context together with Klaus Emmeke, which is a former study comrade of mine, and he was actually the one introducing me to Elsässer in 1995 or 6, where Sabine Bauchmann, a German researcher, came and talked about Elsässer and Ontic Openness for us here in Copenhagen. So much of this and the Ontic Openness is also operating on various levels of hierarchy. So it penetrates everything. So we have no guarantee it can penetrate different places in our handling of COVID situation. You have Ontic Openness within the system, within the COVID virus, but you also have it in the reaction pattern from the people, ordinary people in the street. You have it from the politicians. So that makes the whole thing much more difficult to handle. And the same thing with environmental management systems. So what I would talk about to management now is that I have another conundrum here, is that at a genetic level, when we're talking about biodiversity, we need to ensure that the variability of the genome sequences available are maintained. And this is simply managing as if we have an ecosystem that should keep its Ontic openness. What we see is that actually you can calculate that if you go down in number of threatened populations, they are reaching a size where they're simply not Ontic open any longer. So we are experts in disturbing these, reducing the life space viability of the organisms. One example is that the neonicotinoid impact on the insects that are heavily impacting the bees that should actually serve to fertilize vegetation and thereby damaging our ecosystem services and affecting our societal resilience. So in the same manner, whole ecosystems are likely to be impacted now, and we are going to have a movement of climatic zones likely towards the north. So And both type of openness deals with some sort of information storage. This is where I'm trying to research at the moment. Whatever does information in this context mean, and how can it assist us in addressing the problem? So that is both the Jovanovic approach with the network information and also the information on the Ontic particles themselves alone.
I'm sorry, but time is up. So
okay,
I don't know if you have only 1 minute, you can finish. Or
this is the final slide.
Okay.
So I would claim that in order to maintain the ecosystems at a sufficient functional level, we need to consider both types of openness. They need to have a functionality, and they also need to have some variability. So I think that was actually where the previous session more or less ended. But at present, our societal activities are disturbing actually both of the activities. So I just want to be sure that the second last point is actually what I think is dangerous is that this is now, from a politician point of view and mentorship point of view, being just a demanding of functionality of the nature, and they tend to not give a damn about the biodiversity of the systems. We see that here in Copenhagen, the moment 1 kilometer where I'm at, 7,000 years old ecosystem, 12 to 20 red listed species in dangers, and yet they insist on building or constructing on the area because we need to have Copenhagen to grow. So that's it. So all of this is just references, the rest of it, and ways to have a view of it.
Okay. So, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.